Right, we've got our first real-world project here. The first thing we're going to do is talk about how we approach this. We're not just going to dive straight in and start grading. We've got a bit of prep to do first. Now, I've already used the Baked Master workflow to get this project into Resolve. Go ahead and do that. Refer back to the Baked Master workflow videos if necessary. Now we've got our project conformed and we're ready for work, we're going to watch the whole thing through. We're paying particular attention here. We're looking for things that may be an issue later on, or things that we really like about this footage and might inform the look we're going for. I already like the blue and red stroke yellow colour scheme that's naturally occurring within the blue suits and the skin tones of the contributors. Blue and yellow are complementary colours, they look good in each other's company, so that gives us a great starting point for this project. That being said, we don't want to make any skin tones too yellow in the pursuit of this. We'll keep the warm skin tones their natural colour, and use the blue costume and location details as a counterpoint. Working on corporate videos is different from working on narrative films and music videos. Our primary goal with corporate and ads is to make a visually appealing image, basically the rule of cool. In 90% of cases, the client wants what they've got to look the best it possibly can. We're not so concerned with the typical narrative details or narrative through lines that might be helped out by our use of colour. Instead, we're looking for brand colours to come through and be visible, for skin tones to look rich, warm and healthy, and most of all, appealing. When we work on corporate or ads, our primary goal is that the footage we've been given look its best. We've got a great starting point with the blue, yellow, red idea, but this is really important. We work with our footage. We don't try and force it to conform to an idea we had when we saw the first 3 shots. We can do a lot to make uncooperative details conform to our look, but we need to draw a line. Most of the time that comes down to a concept in the grade we call memory colours. Memory colours are a set of distinct colours associated with particular objects that we instantly recognise and have a very small tolerance for them being wrong. Typically, these are the skin tones of people, grass, sky, and the red brick in buildings. We can very easily spot when a blue sky is greenish or when the grass is too blue or yellow. We can very easily spot if a skin tone has been made too pink or yellow, and we can recognise when the red bricks of a building look off too. When we think about how to best implement a look we're working on, we keep this information in mind. Are we interfering with these important colours? Does the skin look too grey or too pink? If I made the contributors' skin tones yellow, would it look odd? Even if that sets up our blue-yellow scheme, does the skin still look wrong? When people start out grading, their first instinct is to make as radical a transformation as possible on everything they're given, and I understand that desire. You want to do your bit and you want to know that you've had an impact. But the truth is, a subtle difference can be worth a whole lot more. Never feel as though you must have totally transformed every shot you're handed. This is especially true in factual and interviews. Our goal here is to polish this footage and give it the best presentation we can, not to turn blue to green or red to yellow and prove that we've been here and that we've done something significant and visually obvious. Right, now we're getting into the right headspace. We'll continue and take a look at the first step of a real-world grade. Click on through to the next lecture when you're ready. So now we're going to get hands-on, but we're not rushing right into the grade proper just yet. We have a few steps left before we get there. The first thing we're going to do is go through our look development phase. This is when we gather a series of reference images and start to really think about the direction we're going to take this project. We're going to gather a few images from a number of different sources. These reference images can be anything and simply serve to inform our use of colour. They are usually, but not always, from video projects or films, but can be photos, video games, paintings and illustrations, anything visual really. We're going to build up a bank of reference images from things that we like and then use that to help inform the direction we're going to take when grading this project. Now, this is an important step, and some real time spent developing looks will always yield a far better result than just rushing in and starting from scratch with no contemplation. It's an important note to tell your clients too. I used to work with a lot of people who would just hand the grade over at the start of a booked day and expect it finished by the evening. There's a real creative process here, and it needs the same consideration and treatment as any other. Communicate with your client and try to get them to send you some still frames from the edit in TIFF format. That will give you a series of images to work on that retain almost all of the colour information that was present on the files the offliner used. Perform your look development on these TIFF stills before the main project even arrives. That way you have your look development out of the way and then have all the working time you need to finish the grade and produce the best possible version of that project. Do not become lackadaisical and think this is going to be easy. It won't turn out as well as it could. Always try and get this sorted first. Preparation and planning are really important to doing the job properly. So I'm going to import a set of still references that I've already found. To do this, we right click at any point in our stills bin in here, and we choose import, and we're going to go to pictures. So by default, Resolve looks for DPX files. We hit this drop down and send it to all files, and then what we've got will turn up here. I now have my reference stills, and I can bring them up and use them like I can any other still I've taken in Resolve. I've got one here from the Super Bowl ad for Mr. Clean and two from the Halifax Bank. This was a very low res one. That's okay. We're not actually going to be making anything with this. It's just a reference for the use of colour. And I particularly liked the use of yellow and blue here. And I liked how clean and blue the uniforms were here and how white and sterile everything was in the background. And I liked the kind of golden sunset and greeny teal. We're going to take a look at developing our looks based on these stills. Now at this point you should go and get your own still references. 5 or 6 is ideal. I've got 3 here because I've already graded this project once. I know what I'm going to do, but try and find a few more references for yourself. At this point you can progress in 2 ways. Now feel free to work along with the demonstrations and imitate as you go, that's fine. Or if you prefer, use the content here to help with your own version of the grade. Either is fine, but both is a lot better. No practice is ever wasted. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to develop a look on one of these shots. I'll choose this one, I think. So first thing I'm going to do is set up my basic contrast and saturation. Now I don't want my shadows to be too harsh. I don't want it to be like that or anything. This is quite a nice sociable atmosphere we're going for. This is a recruitment firm, and they want to be approachable, they want to be dynamic, they want to be appealing, they don't want anything to be too dramatic or off-putting. So the shadows shouldn't get too dark, and we probably want nice, bright highlights. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase the, there we go, increase the mid-tone shadow contrast a little bit with this curve, which is a good trick. So I'm not crushing everything down or making shadows like this. What I'm just doing is pushing my undertones down a little bit and getting just, better definition of those details there. And I'm largely leaving my midtones and highlights alone, and that just helps add a little bit more detail to this image. Now we'll bring up the saturation a little bit more. That's pretty good. Now there's quite a strong yellow tint here, so what we're going to do is balance this. Just want to be very careful of not making things too cool and making sure that the skin doesn't go completely pink. Okay, that skin might be a little bit on the magenta side. Now I've put my color balance and my brightness balance on the same node here. If you feel confident enough to do that now, go ahead. Otherwise, make a second node when you start to use the color wheels. Just make it that much easier to keep track of what you've done. So, as a basic primary grade, that's a good starting point. It's got a lot of work to go, but we can get there. We can already start to see some similarities between this image here and the reference still we've chosen, or that I've chosen. We've got that nice sterile background there. We've got nice clean blues. We've got that kind of pinkish looking skin. So what we can then do is go through and start to clean this up and start to really get there. So let's just take a look at this. Okay, in this shot we can actually see on the scopes down here we don't actually have a point of pure black. It looks a little bit washed out for my tastes, and she looks a little bit pink. That hair looks maybe a little bit magenta-y. So whilst I like the separation between the background and the contributor here, the actress in this case, I don't quite like the way they've got their contrast, so I don't think I'll copy the contrast. I think I like to keep a few definite dark details there. What I will do in this node is primarily take care of the jacket. Now we've got a lot of blue and greeny looking things. First I'm going to do a UV sat, and see what I get. It may be that that's clean enough already. I might need to do a little bit of work on the hues of different shades of blue. Now, I don't want to make it too harsh. I always run the risk of introducing noise when I make very harsh adjustments on a secondary curve, and if you have a very harsh drop like this, then the pixels that fall within this range can start to show big variations in saturation, hue, or brightness. We typically want things to be quite rounded off, so we avoid those harsh edges, because the harsher the edge on this curve, the more likely you are to get noise, because you're making pixels of relatively similar values have very different operations be carried out on them. It could be that this blue pixel here is very saturated, and now this very slightly blue, very slightly pink pixel here is normal, and that makes noise because one is very bright and one is dull. So we typically try and round these off. I don't want to go absolutely ballistic here. It's got to be nice and cool and stylized, but it's not going to be mental like that. Although actually, I quite like how strong that is, but it throws up issues with the orange spill and some of the shadows. We can see if we go in, we start to get regions on the jacket here which are dark because of the orange spill. I say spill, the orange reflection of the wood here is bouncing up on his arm. So if I really, really go for it, I'm going to make the divide between the blue and the orange reflection here all the more obvious, and I want to avoid that. So I'm going to bring it back down and be sensible, and I'd say there is looking pretty good. And you can see the difference that's made in that nice blue jacket. I like that now. Maybe a little bit more. Now, the background here is looking a bit cyan, and I want to keep things in this quite nice and neat blue colour scheme. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a slight adjustment to cyan hues in this image. So you can see I can make them nice and green, or what I want is to try and get those blues in the background, the cyan greens in the background, to be more similar to our jacket. And what I'm just going to do is bring up the vector scope. Yeah, and you can see the cyan down here. We're not going to bring it right up because it's going to start to go a bit magenta, but I'd say that is better. So now if we take a look at this, we had before and after. Now we've taken care of that nice background. So let's think about what else we need. I quite like where that's going as a look. I like what I've taken from here. I think the background there is nice and clean. I could double down on that. I could use the lum versus sat curve, and I will make a new node because now I'm working on something different. So we've had primaries, jacket and blues, well basically the blues here. Now we're working on the background. I can pull some of the colour out of those highlights back there. I want to be careful that I'm not making big white patches on his face, on the skin highlights when I'm doing this, where if I pull that right down, obviously he looks bizarre there. I want to keep that under control, but I want to try and get these nice bright regions back here very clean. And now we've got mixed light sources here. We've got some tungsten coming in from the right. That's most likely daylight coming in from a skylight, and when we mix light of two sources, obviously they have a different colour temperature, and one doesn't look white. So I'm not going to be able to make a primary adjustment that is likely to get this whole image correct, which is why I'm working in secondaries here. It's why I'm just arbitrarily taking the saturation out of these highlights, because they're most likely daylight, and I'm probably more likely to have been balanced for tungsten light looking at the setup of this shot. In fact, I have been, because you can see the reflection of the tungsten lights, the practical lights, which were present in the filming location back there in the reflection of the glass. So I am set up for tungsten lights on this shot, and we've got some daylight coming in the background. So we'll just, there we go, take some of that colour out, give it a nice sterile, clean look. Now I'd say the next thing to work on here would be the skin. This was shot on an FS7, and FS7s are well known for not having the most flattering treatment of skin tones. Sadly, it can actually be quite mangling in places. It's however a good 10-bit camera, so what we're going to do is make a selection. Now, typically when we make a selection of skin, a few things always interfere. Red brick on a building will interfere, and wood. Wood and human skin are very difficult to separate out through color keying alone because they share a lot of the same saturation, hue, and brightness values. Wood tends to be a little bit darker in terms of brightness, but as you can see on the fiberboard down here, it's actually pretty similar. I'm going to bring the low sat up to get rid of any of the interference I might get on the shirt. I'm going to bring low up to get rid of that, and then blur that out. I want to move away from yellow. I know that a lot of the wood here is yellow, and I have more red and pink in the skin. Now I'm starting to get holes in the skin here, but that's okay. What I can do is I can use our clean white settings to fix that, and then clean black. I'm having a bit of trouble with my mouse, bear with me. We put our clean whites up, and then we will blur it out. We might just bring... Okay, and then what we might just do now that we've got the skin, so we have a fairly good skin key, but it's not perfect. If I start making extreme adjustments here, you can see the shadows aren't quite included. We have a bit of a reflection on the table down here. We can garbage map that out dead easily though. There's a little bit of a halo, best I could do, around these hands, so we're not going to do anything really strong within this qualification. We're going to do something a little bit more subtle, and it's mainly just going to be saturation. Just a few points of saturation, I think. In terms of hue, we can check the vector scope. He's pretty ideal if we turn our eyeline on. He's more or less right down the eyeline. Is the hue, the colour of his skin is fine, doesn't need any work. I was just thinking it looked a little bit porcelain and washed out. So I'm just adding a little bit more oomph to his skin tone, and then we get a nice contrast between his skin and the blue of the jacket here. And now we've just got... We do have some spill on the table. Because of the nature of the adjustment I've made, it doesn't really produce much in the way of a visible result. If I go before and after, you don't see anything, whereas on the skin you can see before and after. It's a relatively small impact, but it is important. So we've got nice clean skin, we've got nice blue on the jacket there. There's a little bit, like some of these shadows are looking a bit green and a bit yellow, a little bit off. I might do something on those next, but the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to finish off working on our contributor's skin, and I'm going to make a face vignette because his face doesn't quite have the contrast it would need to make a feature of itself. I would say that his face needs more contrast here, so I'm going to stick a vignette on that. And I'm going to track that power window. Dead easy. And then I'm just going to jack up the contrast on that a little bit. It doesn't need any further saturation, but now what we've done is we've increased the contrast, maybe not quite as much on the shadows. Now what we've done, maybe what we'll do is we'll play on the idea of midtones versus highlights. Let's just take a look at that full screen. I like that, it might be a little bit strong. Let's just tone down our shadows and mids there. I think he's a very nice, his face there is a very good focal point. If this were a much closer angle, I'd do the eyes separately as well, but for the time being, that's fine. Okay, I'm quite happy with the way this is going. The only thing that stands out to me now in terms of definite image quality are some of these kind of greenish shadows down here. So let's just take a look at our shadows and see if we might be able to fix that. If I take a proper look at our scopes, I can see elevated levels of green in the shadows down here, so these correspond to these low readings, and we've got a bit of red, but we've obviously got more green, and the blue's a bit lower as well. I suspect this isn't going to work very well, but we can take a look at putting some magenta into the lift. Okay, that's better than I thought. It's very slight, but that does actually help it out. Before, it's a bit green. After, it's just cleared out. On the kind of streaming video you get on Udemy, that might not be immediately clear, but when you do something like that yourself, you can see that these small adjustments make a lot of difference. Like just cleaning out those shadows there just really helps make this image quite clean and bright. So this is a pretty good look now. I'm quite happy with this. We didn't copy this exactly. We've got much, in my opinion, nicer contrast, and obviously our surroundings are different, but we've taken cues from it. We've taken the cue of the slightly pinkish skin tones against the blue and the kind of sterile bright background. When we're working from references, we can just try and imitate the reference, but we don't always. In most cases, we're looking for an inspiration and then we put our own spin on that idea, and that's what I like to think that we've done here. So I like this as a look. It's fairly good, it's simple, it's clean, it's quite nice and appealing. It's got a very nice, simple colour scheme. It's technically very good, it's exposed very nicely. You're clearly drawn to the contributor's face. His skin is good. That's fine. So there's one last thing I might be tempted to add, and that might be a vignette. We'll experiment. I'm going to make a new node. And as I've said before, don't worry about the number of nodes you're using. Your goal is to do what's appropriate for the project. It's not to put 15 different nodes down on everything. It's not to put 25 nodes down on everything and have everyone think you're the super colorist. It's just to do whatever is appropriate for your project at hand. This project might go up to between, let's say, 5 or 12 nodes, depending entirely on what you choose to do, and either of those numbers is fine. If you get a good grade on this with 3 nodes or even 1, that's fine. It's just whatever produces the best result. There's no rule on the number of nodes you're expected to produce during a grade, and nobody's going to look at your grade and think, oh, you've only put 4 nodes down here, you're not doing your job. Like, just nobody's going to think that. So don't worry about it. Now back to the point, I'm going to make a vignette here and just see if I like the effect it has. I'm going to use a linear window. I'm going to drag it out. And what I'm going to do, there's a slight slant to the way he's sitting. When I make vignettes like this, I like to find kind of lines in the shot. So let's say there's a diagonal line described by the alignment of his spine and by the center of this shirt down here. I like that. There's quite a nice dynamic shape. So what I want to do is make a vignette that uses that shape to really emphasize the way in which he's sitting, and that kind of doubles down on the kind of the movement and the lines and the composition of the image. So you could just put a circular vignette on this, but I don't think that would be as good because he's making that a diagonal line. I quite like that, and we also have this line here described by the table as well. We have these lines intersecting, so we have quite a nice kind of X thing going on, which is quite cool and interesting. Then what we'll do is we'll invert this, hit this button here, turn it off, and then we'll just bring down the brightness and the saturation a smidge there. And now what we've got is a bit of a vignette on the left hand side of our image that just focuses us back down on our contributor here. What we want to avoid is this big bright region being very distracting, because it's the brightest thing on the image and there's some quite dark stuff there. High contrast draws the eye. We don't want the eye necessarily to be drawn to this region back here. We want it to be drawn to our contributor's face. So we'd reduce the contrast in this region, and now our focal point is clearly and naturally the face of our contributor, and I think that is pretty good. So I'm going to save now that I've done that. Right, so that's the first look that we've generated here. That's the first look we've developed. We're going to make a new album. We're going to rename the first one Reference Stills, and then we're going to rename the next one LD Stills, stands for Look Development. I'm going to take these and then I'm going to export them as a JPEG and email them to my client and say, look, this is what I've got. These are kind of the 3 ideas we're going for. Please tell me what you think. And then the client's going to come back with feedback of their own, or they're just going to say, hey, I like that, and choose one of the looks I've developed. Then I know the direction I'm taking for the rest of the project, and we're going to go through and match everything else up. So I've got that there. I'm going to right click and we're just going to go over versions quickly. So a version is, well, a version of the shot. You can have multiple versions of the shot which exist alongside each other, and you only have one active. You only ever see the grade on your active version. So what we can do is we can set up 3 versions of this shot. Excuse me. What we can do is set up 3 versions of this shot and then have it so that we only see one at a time. Now what that means is that we can grade this shot 3 different ways, and then we can always just have it still down here and we can just click back onto that version when we want to see that grade again. So this is version 1. I'm going to rename that and say clean blue v warm. And now I'm going to go to local versions, and we're going to use local versions for now. I'm going to go over remote versions in a more advanced project later on. Local versions for now, create new version. And this one's going to be blue v yellow. Now I've got 2 versions. I'm on blue v yellow. If I just reset all my grades, I got nothing. But if I go back and I load blue v clean, blue v warm, I'm back to my old grade. So that hasn't gone anywhere. We'll just load up blue v yellow again, and now we start from scratch, this time using this reference. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to basically copy the grade across, but I'm going to delete all but the first node, and that way I've already got my primary grading done. Looking at this, I do have some clean blacks, I do have some low mids and some high highlights. Might bring the highlights down a little bit for this one. Okay, so this time I'm going to go for this real blue v yellow. Now the important thing to note is even though we have a strong yellow push to the midtones and everything outside of the blue, we still have clean blacks and shadows, we still have clean super bright highlights up here. So what we don't want to do is just go, look, job's done, and then we have these horrible artifacts all over the place. What we want to do is keep these bright whites clean and keep these clean blacks clean as well, whilst having an overall yellow push to everything outside of the blue colours. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the blue and the cyan into position. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the cyan and the blue all line up quite neatly. This is hue versus sat, not hue versus hue, common mistake. And I want to be careful that I'm not pushing what's already blue into magenta, so. Okay, cool, so I've got my blues there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a secondary qualification. Now, these kinds of secondaries are challenging to produce. It may take some time to refine these. I'm going to start, there we go. We're going to add a load of blur as well. And then what I've got here, I'm basically doing everything but the skin. Now I can really push the blue on this, bang up the saturation, make it really, really blue. And now what we can do is we can make an outside node. We can hold Alt and hit O. And now anything we do in this node, as I said before when talking about alpha, we've passed an alpha channel along, so we're now working outside of the qualification we had before. So everything I do in this node happens outside of our old qualification. So now we can start to introduce a yellow push to everything. Need to make sure that we keep our highlights clean. So we've got yellow highlights and our shadows are going a little bit blue, so I'm going to pull a little bit more blue into the shadows. And what I want to do is clean out my highlights. So once again, I'm going to go back to Lum v Sat and just bring that down, and now we still have that clean highlight. We have quite a warm feel. The skin, let's take a look. The skin is arguably okay there. Let's just take another look at this. Okay, let's vignette that up and see how it looks. It's looking a little bit pallid at the moment, but I think that's mainly because it's lacking contrast. So what we can do is add a quick face vignette here. And same as last time, let's play up the contrast between the mids and the highlights here. There we go, that adds a lot more nice detail. I don't know, I'm in two minds about the skin on that one. I think it might be looking a little bit off and yellow, but then that does fit in with everything else. Let's just take a look at the difference between the two. So it's subtle, but that one's much cleaner. This one has a more yellow push to it. We might even push that even further. And on this occasion, I don't feel the left-hand side is particularly distracting, so I won't bother with the other vignette. So this is another version. We'll grab this and put it in our LD stills bin. And now we're going to make a new local version. And this time we're going to call it Cyan with Sunlight. And we're going to reset the grade and start again. What we'll do is we'll just make sure that we get back to the same starting point we had. And that was copy and paste the old grade along, and then delete everything but the first node, which is where we took care of most of our primary grading. Now let's take a look at our third reference still. So this is quite different. This has a very different, let's just get the parade back up. This has a very different set of contrast and a very different airy, blurred out screen blur kind of a look. So what we can do is experiment with this one. This is going to be quite different from the other two. It's a bit experimental. It's probably not going to be the best fit for all of these shots. It may be shots like this, outdoor shots like this. Some of the cutaways will take better to that kind of treatment than the actual interviews, but we'll have a look. What we'll do is first off take a look at the kind of contrast ratio we've got going on. And make things a little bit brighter. Okay, we're starting to get blown out hot spots on the shirt there, so we need to bring things down a bit. In fact, what I might do is bring that up and then go into a curve. And I might just bring the very top of the luma down. There we go. So I still get the brightness I want, but I keep my highlights under control. Just be careful not to do things like flatten out the face detail when you're doing that, because the face is quite bright on this one. Okay, so we've got quite a divide. We've got quite nice warm highlights. We can see up here red, green, a bit lower and blue, so everything is a slightly warm push, quite a warm quality to it, but it's not super saturated. If we take a look at it on the vector scope, it's not a super saturated shot. We already have stronger colours without much grading. So maybe there's even a little bit of violet in the shadows there. Let's take a look at the parade as well. There's definitely blue in the shadows. On the right hand side, in the face, I feel like there's violet there. I feel like there's purple in the shadows. Maybe it's just a little bit of red. So let's see where we go with this. So the first thing I'm going to do this time is get the jacket in the right place. This time I'm changing the blue to cyan. And then I'll jack up the cyan. Now we typically don't do things like this. We typically don't change important brand colours like this, but in this case we're experimenting a little bit. Now let's take a look at the next thing. Let's have a look at how we might get this kind of soft sunlight and this warm highlights going on. So we'll push a little bit of warmth ever so slightly. No, I think I know a better way of doing this. Okay, it's getting a bit of a mess, so let's keep everything organised. Let's go back to our second primary node. We'll bring our mids down a bit more. Cool. Right, we're going to do something more advanced. We're going to use the layer node for the first time. I'm going to cover the layer node. I'm going to cover the layer node in more detail on a later project. But for now, we'll do a simple use of it. We'll see how far that gets us. So the layer node is like setting up a layer stack in Photoshop. It turns our nodes into Photoshop-like layers, and then we can choose a blend mode, which lets them all collapse onto each other and make creative effects. So we can set it to overlay and make a bleach bypass. We can set it to screen and make a screen blur. We can set it to multiply and make something very dark and shadowy. What we're going to do is use a few new tools, and don't worry about this too much. This is almost certainly not the look we're going ahead with. In fact, it's definitely not the look we're going ahead with. I've already got that planned out, but we're going to experiment a little bit because we can experiment. I'm going to blur this out. Composite mode. If we right click on the actual layer mixer node, which is this grey block here, we can choose different blend modes and see the different effects that they have. And it's between add and screen. I'm going to choose screen. Now this looks ridiculous right now, but bear with me. So I think I forgot to mention, hold Alt and hit L to make a layer mixer. And now what I'm doing is I'm grading the bottom node. So the bottom node is the top layer, which is it's backwards essentially, which is frustrating, but that's the way Resolve does it. So the bottom node is on top of the top node. The top layer is on top of the bottom layer. So we're currently seeing the top layer. It's got a blend mode set to screen. So it's making the node underneath brighter. It's acting as though it's light being projected onto the image underneath. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this quite nice and yellow and warm and sunny. And then we've blurred it out, so we have like a nice blur effect. Now if we go into this icon here, this is our node key, and key output essentially dictates the opacity of any given node we're working on. If we turn it down to 0, that node disappears. If we turn it up to 100%, it's perfectly visible. So what we're going to do is set this to somewhere around 0.45, maybe even less, maybe 0.3. And now the effect that has is to give us a slightly kind of hazy glowing effect like we can see here. Now on this one, maybe we don't see that all in the shadows, so what we can do is we can add a secondary to our bottom node and remove some of the shadows. And when we have something like this, the bottom node is now only visible within its key, so only the keyed parts go on. So if we pull it right up, we don't see it at all. And now we just see, there we go. Don't worry too much if this bit is difficult to keep up with. This is mainly just a bit of experimentation, and we'll go through it in more detail in the next real world project when I manage to publish that. But for the time being, I just wanted to explore that idea and kind of get that. Okay, so that's cool. The face is too bright, but we can fix that next. When you're making a new node and using a layer mixer, make sure you have the orange border around this grey brick, and then hit Alt and S. If you have one of your nodes beforehand active, you're just going to make more nodes before the layer mixer, and everything's going to go out of control. So make sure that the layer mixer itself is active, hold Alt and hit S. And now we're going to do some treatment on the face. Okay, so I'm going to bring the saturation down slightly when I bring him down as well. Otherwise it might go a little bit odd. So now we've got that there, we've got that kind of dreamlike glow. We might add a little bit more yellow into our glow layer. And we're kind of getting towards this kind of dreamy glowing effect with the cyan shadows. There's something about this which is in some way appealing, but I think it's a bit too experimental and a little bit too odd for this project. We're not going to go ahead with this look, but it's always worth trying something a little bit out there because you always learn something when you do this. Whilst it was an interesting experiment, and it's not produced an image which I think is terrible. I quite like a number of things about it. I like the cyan colour, I quite like the way his face has turned out, but I don't think it's appropriate for this project. I think the other two looks we've got, which are much cleaner, are more appropriate for this project. So we're going to grab that still. Now, this has been an excellent place to start. This is a good overview of look development, and this is what we do quite a lot of when we're doing this on a real-world project. I might set down an hour or two before the booked day to do the look development and make sure that we really get the direction down so that when the project arrives and when I'm on the clock, that we really spend all of that time getting the grade done. I'm going to take these LD stills now and I'm going to send them to my client. They'll provide me with feedback, and that's fine. I'll then refine this and arrive at a look that they like, or they might just choose one. And then when we arrive at a look that's signed off from the client, I then have the direction for this job, and now I know what I'm doing in the grade proper. So now that we've covered this part of the process, we're ready to start the proper grade, so click on through to the next lecture once you're ready.